Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for appearing for us today. I want to ask you about three areas of policy concern, two of which are all three actually were in the initial statement. Conservation initiatives, the issue of energy resilience, as well as what you all keep referring to as BRAC. And so we're going to have a little challenging conversation on that. First, regarding conservation, I was pleasantly surprised to see a lengthy section in your written testimony about the DOD's initiatives in this regard. I've recently introduced a bill. It's called Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And interesting, you point out that there is a surge of potential endangered species being listed coming, and that the DOD is orienting itself to participate in preventative measures in that regard. This is exactly what the Recovering America's Wildlife Act does. Bipartisan initiative, taking some monies that come from our mineral revenues off of federal lands and plowing it back into state wildlife management plans, which is a federal mandate. In Nebraska, we work voluntarily, giving landowners choice in this regard. But the DOD, as a part of your policy planning culture, should really take a look at this, because it could help us create the continuity of habitat with existing public lands, as you're already doing, that addresses environmental species problems. Because once that starts, you're in the midst of litigation, the regulation moves to litigation, it's a horrible mess. So not many people win, not many communities win, the species don't necessarily win because it takes so long. So this is an innovative approach to, again, trying to provide the continuity of habitat by funding existing state initiatives with federal mineral resource revenues. And so it's actually being a good steward of the revenues that we have, or the resources that we have. Revenue extraction back into resource recovery. So Recovering America's Wildlife Act, I'd like you, again, to be aware of this and to potentially incorporate it into your policy planning culture, because it could greatly, I think, assist you in the larger goal. Our problem is we address this in small verticals rather than in a continuity. And given the large footprint of the DOD, particularly with land holdings, this could be extremely helpful. So I'm very pleased that you raised this in the testimony. So can I have some mild commitment that you'll integrate this into your policy plan?
Congressman, we'll definitely take a look at it. And as I said in my written statement, we're working really diligently with DOI across the board.
I saw that.
To see what we can do to get in front and proactively manage. We're not in any way trying to dismiss Endangered Species Act. We think it's absolutely critical.
Well, this is an attempt to move from, again, regulation and litigation to collaboration, which ends up saving all of us a huge amount of money in the long run and actually achieves the mission of the Endangered Species Act. So it's a novel approach.
Well, we're working very consistently with what you're proposing there.
Well, we're also working with the Department of Interior in this regard, so we may be back in touch. Okay. Yes, energy resilience, you have a 25% goal of use of renewable resources by 2025. How are we coming?
Coming along.
It's the best case story out there, the best return on investment. Do you have some case studies that are showing that could be scalable templates that have been implemented?
We are continuing to look at all sources of energy. Renewable is one source, but we're looking across the board. We definitely have a desire to want to take our goals.
That's your mandate, 25% renewable by 2025.
Right, we are working towards that goal, but I'll be honest with you, we are as concerned with providing security, energy security to our most critical facilities. To what degree that goal is compatible with our overwhelming, compelling urgency to making sure our critical facilities can be powered.
Do you have case studies or actually implemented processes that could be scalable across the system that meet your goal for security and energy resilience, but actually is consistent with the broader mandate here?
We are working across a whole range of efforts.
But specifics. I need
if I can ask the service to provide specifics.
Okay. Yes, sir. Thanks for the question again and the support. So each installation is different because the environment is that. And I'll give you a good example of energy security.
I have two military installations, Strategic Command and Offutt Air Force Base. So I get it.
Yes, sir.
So, but I just back to specifics that are might possibly scalable. I'm sorry, I'm just running out of time. I need to hurry along.
Yes, sir. So an example is Miramar, where we're taking methane off a wasteland.
Good.
We're getting methane. We'll be putting a microgrid in there, and we'll be able to. Our goal is to operate off the grid.
Okay, let me ask you this. That's great. That's very helpful. What is the process internally by which you are sharing best practices? Is there some continuity of initiative going on, or is it up to each base to sort of create its own culture in this regard?
At the OSD level, we're working very closely with the services. It's every project that comes in, we're taking a look at where can we use those lessons learned in other projects.
Okay, I may come back to this in the next round because I'm running out of time, but thank you. So hold the thoughts. Let's unpack it a little bit further.
Yes,
One
sir.
more comment, Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me. Look, we keep doing this, we keep using it's now a word, BRAC. Does anybody remember what it means? Yes, but now it's become its own word, like Xerox means copy. So we need to move past this, okay? That was somebody else's idea 25 years ago. Not the intention necessarily, but the way in which we speak about this, because we're not implementing it in this way. So I'm proposing this to you all, as I've proposed before previous panels for years, that we move away from the term because the term causes such indigestion, okay? This is a new term, miscellaneous. It stands for miscellaneous. Military Installations Savings Commission. It's a much less threatening kind of prospect, and it's consistent with what you all are already doing. And if I could, and maybe in the next round, and perhaps you said this earlier, I apologize because I wasn't here, but I'd like to know the excess inventory across all branches, so we could just have that in the forefront of our mind again. But when you start saying this closes, which is frankly not real in the environment we're up here, rather than, well, look, we've got this outbuilding here that could be sold to Lincoln Parks and Recreation and carved out, that's a higher and better use for the community. That's consistent with this, and it's a lot less frightening and it's more politically viable than the large-scale base realignment closure commission, which again, that's just not reality. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, I interrupt you, so if you'd like to continue your train of thought about best practices in terms of implementation of sustainable energy projects, and then if someone would comment further as to how this is discussed internally in terms of sharing templates or ideas, just tell me the process. That would be helpful.
So with the goal, and we've always had the goal, I mean, our installations are combat power, to project combat power in time of peace and support of national defense, period. And that's what we're out there for. So over the years, we've done some, I think, some really good projects to afford us the ability to operate off the grid, whether it's pulling methane off the San Diego, whether it's cogeneration plants at 29 Palms, which would be able to operate off the grid, whether it's Albany, Georgia, a depot, which we're basically net zero down there. But it's about operating combat power. And each installation, depending, as you know, sir, whether you're in a warm hemisphere area or a desert or a mountainous area, what renewables, what type of energy resiliency, it applies more geographically than now we share that within the Department of Navy and then with OSD. So I think the information's out there. Now we just have to make the right investments, I think, to ensure not just the renewable energy, but that microgrid or ability or wheel energy around that base in order to generate combat power.
Look, your comments are fair, that your mission is to keep us safe, and you have to do that through the means that are available to you. However, because, again, the footprint is so large and the investment is so big, sometimes by thinking constructively and creatively, you actually can, for the long term, enhance the ability to deliver a mission under adverse circumstances while also furthering a larger societal goal. And we've talked about it here in terms of environmental protection, but also in terms of establishing the next phases and generations of what we need to move to anyway, in terms of bridging to a more sustainable future. So it's not putting that fundamental mission on the DOD, but to the degree you can partner with it and leverage it for your own sake, but also furthering this broad societal public good is necessary. That's why I'm trying to understand best practices that are out there and then the internal dynamics in which those are shared. From my perspective, looking from the outside in, dealing primarily with, not in this capacity, but in who I represent back home, we've just kicked off the initiative to try to create a working group around deeper exploration of how is geothermal possible, is wind where we are possible. Solar has potential, but there's some complexities where I live. So can anyone address this? Yes, General.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Fortenberry. And I'd like to comment on when I talked about partnerships and working outside the gates, if you will. When you talk about it, think about energy security and resilience in the state of Hawaii right now. The Army has taken on a partnership with Hawaii Electric Company for a 50-megawatt biofuel plant. And the intent of that is, in the case of a natural disaster or power interruption, we are able to sustain the whole of Schofield Barracks, Wheeler Airfield, Kania Field, and one of a local hospital for a period of 30 days. It's above the tsunami zone, and we think that's a model partnership
All right. Well,
that we've
let's.
explored.
And I live in a state where there's public power, so sometimes it's a little easier for us to actually urge a municipal entity to partner constructively with another municipal entity, and that's what we're trying to do. But there's all types of distributed generation options that are out there, and again, they might be able to incorporate, depending on circumstances, sustainable energy models.
I will also say that the Army and the Air Force actually collaborated their efforts. They took their energy offices and combined it into one. So they're taking the lessons learned every day, and they're applying them. And we're looking at, okay, let's bundle more than one installation. Let's look at a range of missions to what we can do working with a local utility company on addressing the utility needs without just having to be in these stovepipes. So there's a lot of that collaboration going on right now within DOD.
Okay, good. Yes, sir.
So I was really going to echo the same thing. So the Navy has got an office that focuses on this. They also work collaboratively and share.
Called the Energy Office.
Yes, sir. REPO, Renewable Energy Office. It's now actually Resiliency Office. It resides in Naval Facilities Command, and we've got have done a lot of work over the past couple of years, putting in projects. We've got a lot of projects going on right now. I can easily get you a list of what's been done and what's happening with specifics.
Well, that's okay. That's just more work for you guys. But because I would just ask you to keep doing this because it's important for these broader reasons that we just discussed here. But again, I don't know if it's a mandate or a strong suggestion somewhere embedded in law, but it's by 2025, 25%. Now, I hear what you're saying about geographic diversity, and it's got to be consistent with the fundamental mission. I get that. But I think it can be. So we're pushing on this back home as well, just to let you all know. So I may have officials at the installations that I work directly with come directly to you. Would that be all right, Mr. Secretary?
Absolutely, yes.
Secondly, back to the Military Installation Savings Commission. What is just a quick summary of your excess inventory across the branches?
So we'll go from my end. The last reported savings that we had was roughly 30% or excess. The majority of that, as I alluded to earlier, is really built upon ramps. And so we are right now working toward getting our arms better around facilities. So people normally associate facilities and excess facilities, and I don't have a good figure to give you.
What do you mean
associated
on
with that.
ramps? Literally the runway?
So bases. So when we talk about ramps, it's where we park our aircraft. And so if you have reduced the number of aircraft in a wing over time or reduced the number of squadrons, then we have excess parking spaces.
So that's a little
for our
harder to
aircraft.
deal with. So I think the types of things that we're
Yes, sir.
talking about that
What-
could be spun off or
Yes, sir.
sold and integrated into the community in a constructive manner so you're not disrupting community life.
Yes, sir.
That
So
kind of-
what you're looking for, I don't have at hand right now to tell you. We'll come back and get you the best answer we
So
can.
that 30% figure includes these,
Excess ramps, yes, sir.
well, these large infrastructure that in likelihood doesn't have a repurposed use for some type of community need.
Yes, sir, that's
All right.
correct.
Sir, so part of it, I mean, we know right now what we have is just in Q3 and Q4, 17% or is in the facility or Q3, 4 condition. The Q4, we would say we need to demo now. So there are about 733 buildings that we know we can get rid of now. But part of the infrastructure reset is recapitalization is as important or more important sometimes than MilCon, taking that money from the MilCon, as opposed to new platform from the MilCon. So as we're doing our basic facility requirements, so what is an infantry battalion rate space-wise? And that's where we're coming up. This is what you rate, and this is what you should have. And if you're typical Marine, if you get a facility, you'll expand in that facility. You'll use it for martial arts. You'll use it for storage of equipment and things like that. So we're coming up with standards. We actually have them now. And we're consolidating Marines, moving Marines from barracks into, consolidating. Maybe they were spread out in 2 barracks and put them in 1 to get the occupancy rate. And then as we do that, then we can have either recapitalize that building for another purpose, or if it's not in good condition, to demo it. So right now, we know low-hanging fruit, there's like 733 Q4 buildings.
So I think this question of excess inventory perhaps is too broad. There's a lot of subsets of this. As you're talking about that kind of infrastructure, really transitioning to something else, minimal likelihood. So it has lessening and lessening value. Yours, you're talking about a consolidation of assets that you already have versus, in my mind, I'm thinking of, again, going back to BRAC, where you're actually spinning off or closing certain things, but rather than looking at it through that lens, how do you actually integrate those into some other community use? So I think that we need some subsets of what excess inventory means. I think that's.
And Congressman, also, it's not just savings, it's military value. The biggest part of the
that's
BRAC process.
savings.
Well, what I'm getting at is
Different
that
sense.
we have to
Yeah, I
assess
understand.
what future value with those facilities will be to future missions. So we're having to do that level of complexity too.
Okay, but one more moment, Mr. Chairman, if you would. But the general statistic, as we have heard for many years, particularly from the Air Force, is you got 30% excess inventory. Well, what that implies is you've got wasted space sitting out there. We're just paying electrical utility bills, or it's not meeting its highest and best use in terms of community repurposing. But it's not exactly right. That's what I'm trying to get to. What is the percent of assets that could be sold off, reintegrated into, or repurposed into another community use, or repurposed, as you're suggesting, into a higher value for the military itself?
So we've been working on that. The Congress has given us authorities over 15 years to take an underutilized or suboptimized piece of property or a building and go ahead and spin it off. Go ahead and lease it, give it to somebody else, get it off our inventory. We've been working at that. We've been working at demolition. So we have been exploring those other ways to reduce that number of excess facilities. We're getting to the point where all the low-hanging fruit is done. Now we've got to get to a bigger process here that allows us to take a look holistically at the enterprise.
Thank you, Mr.